Hi and welcome. Well, I'm finally getting around to removing the heads off my Moto Guzzi Le Mans 1000 to see what's happening in there with the valve guides. I believe that the valve guides are fairly worn on this particular bike. Now these engines are notorious for valve guide wear. They have very big valves that are inclined at a fairly steep angle, and that means that there's a fairly heavy side loading placed on those valves and valve guides by the rocker arms, and they have a tendency to wear. One of the indications of wear is the fact that I'm getting oil on the plugs, and if I replace the plugs with new plugs, oil is deposited from the inlet side, inlet valve side, onto that plug and gradually spreads over the plug over time, which sort of leads me to believe that the oil is coming down the guide on deceleration when there's high vacuum in that inlet manifold and ending up on the plug. But I won't really know until I strip the engine down and have a look. I'll also take the barrels off and check the pistons and the bores while I'm about it. But the first thing I need to do is remove the tank, exhaust system and the carburettors. May or may not have to remove the fairing. We'll just see how it goes. And then we'll take the right hand head off first, and I'll let you have a look at what's happening in there. Probably do this video in 3 parts, disassembly, and if the guides need doing, a separate video on K-lining the guides. K-lining is a process where they actually drill out the existing guides, leaving most of the guide in place, and insert a thin wall sleeve, which is then drilled and reamed to fit the new valve in situ. It's a very popular process, and many mechanics say that it's actually a better process than replacing the actual guides themselves, and has a pretty good service life. So that's what I'll be doing if the guides need doing. And in the third part we'll cover reassembly, including adjusting the valve guides and torquing down the heads again. So first things first, I guess I'll better start with the tank. Okay, it's now time to take the header pipes and the crossover off. I've just put this hockey strap at the back here to hold it up so the whole thing doesn't drop. It's also worthwhile spraying all the joints as you're doing this with WD-40. So now we'll just attempt to get this off without dropping everything. And there we have it. Okay, next we'll take the carburettors off. I'll just set them up on top here. I often just tie them together so that there's no risk of them falling off. You will find that these elbows, they get very hard with age. To refit them, you just put them in some hot water and they soften right up, but they can be quite difficult to get off. Okay, now we can take the right-hand rocker cover off. Okay, before we start undoing any bolts on the head itself, we just need to make sure that both valves are closed. And to do that, you just need to rotate the engine round. You can either use the rear wheel if the bike's on the center stand, just pop it into top gear, or you can alternatively take the alternator cover off and just use an Allen key in the bolt there to rotate it round. And we just need to rotate it around so both valves are closed and we've got a bit of free play in the rockers. It'll be pretty close to top dead center for what we want in disassembly. So the inlet valve is now closing. The exhaust is already closed. There's a bit of clearance on both, so both valves are closed, so it's close enough to top dead centre on the firing stroke for the cylinder. We can now remove the rocker gear and then the head. Now I like to keep everything together so that all the parts on the inlet side stay together and all the rocker arm, spring and pins on the exhaust side stay together. And now we just need to take the push rods out. I just like to keep them in the same place when I reassemble an engine, so I just mark them with a permanent marker once I take them out. Almost forgot, there's also a couple of hoses on the back here to take off. This hose won't come off that easily, but it'll probably pop off when I take the head off. You notice there's a little bit of, I suppose, emulsified oil. There's just sweeped out here. One of the big problems of these engines is the venting system actually uses this top frame rail here as part of the venting system, and it has a tendency to fill up with emulsified oil. Okay, now we can take the nuts off the ends of the studs and then we can lift the head and the barrel off. There's a little socket head plug here which you need to undo first, but unfortunately it seems a little bit on the tight side and I've been unable to loosen it. So I'm going to have to take this rocker bridge off first so I can get an impact driver onto that socket head. Then I can gain access to the nut on the stud up there. Well, that's it. That's how you get a head off a Moto Guzzi Le Mans 1000 or any other Moto Guzzi of this era. To get the left-hand cylinder head off, you just rotate the engine around to the firing stroke on the left-hand side so that the valves are closed, and then you can take it off in the same manner as I did on the right here. As you can see from the cylinder head, I'll just put a close-up in there, you know, it's pretty scummy, oily, and has a lot of carbon deposits on it. I'm sure when we disassemble this in part 2, we'll discover that those guides are worn. We'll also pull the barrel off in part 2 and check the bore, the piston and the rings, just to make sure that they're okay or if they need replacing. And then in part 3, I'll cover the reassembly of the bike, torquing down the cylinder head and everything else that needs to be done. So I'll see you again in part 2.